And the issue I want to address myself to is the Secure Rural Schools Act. It expired. It is very, very important to states, particularly in the western part of the United States, where there's a big influence of federal lands, and particularly forest lands. And I think I just caught the end of what my colleague from Oregon talked about as to why we are in this situation in the first place. But I can tell you this is a big economic hit for those rural areas because they don't get the revenue from the federal lands that they otherwise would have had. But what I don't understand is that this issue has strong bipartisan support. I serve on the Rules Committee, and there are 5 of my Democrat colleagues on the Rules Committee, 5 out of 9, that are co-sponsors of this legislation. And we know that we are nearing the end of this Congress. And we know that there are things that have to pass. The tax expander package is a very important package for other provisions in that bill. For example, the sales tax deductibility for states that don't have a state income tax. Florida is in that situation. There are several members of the Rules Committee that are affected by that. My state is one of those. But this issue of secure rural schools is very, very important. And I have 4 counties in my district that are impacted, and one that is heavily impacted. Impacted in a way that my friend from Oregon, Mr. Walden, talked about. And so what I find rather confusing about this is that we have now a bill that will be brought before us that we could pass in a nanosecond. And it's a tax extender bill that the Senate sent over with a vote of 93-2. It has essentially the same provisions that I think everybody agrees, taxes that need to be extended, but it has a provision and a fix to the secure rural schools for 4 years. For 4 years. It allows those communities now to make some plans as to what the transition may be in the future, since of course, I think the best thing we ought to do is utilize our federal lands, but if that's not going to happen, at least they'll have some time to plan for it. So this morning, and by the way, we got the text of this bill at 9:52 this morning, which is little over 3 hours ago, even though we're told that we're going to have 24 hours to look at any bill. But we had it at 9:52 this morning, and we discovered that the Secure Rural Schools Act was out of the House bill. It wasn't in there. Well, I'm a member of the Rules Committee, and as a member of the Rules Committee, you can amend the rules by suspending rules to put certain provisions in that you think need to be passed. It happens all the time, especially at the end of the session. So here we are this morning, discovered the Secure Rural Schools wasn't in there, and I questioned the individual from the Ways and Means Committee, Mr. Blumenauer from Oregon, who came up and testified on the bill. If this was in there, it wasn't in there. So, and by the way, his state is affected. Even though his district isn't affected, his state is affected. So I asked him why this was not in the bill. And his response to me was, well, this is a tax bill. And really the secure rural school issue is a spending issue. So we felt it shouldn't be part of the package. Well, I said, if that's the case, and I accept your argument, then maybe it could go on some sort of appropriation bill. And I thought, wait a minute. Yesterday, we had a continuing resolution with 3 appropriation bills that passed this House, and secure rural schools wasn't on it. I don't know why the Democrat leadership didn't put it on that vehicle. That probably would have been the proper one. But we're running out of time. And the House Rules Committee can suspend the rules and attach a provision to anything they want to. We know the Senate bill came over here 93-2. So, Mr. Speaker, I offered an amendment to take the text of the Senate language, which passed 93-2, and ask that be debated on the House floor. Just ask for it to be debated. If it loses, okay, that's fine, but I think there's broad support. But if it loses, I understand that. I called for a vote on that, and the vote was on a party line vote, 8-3 no. In other words, the 5 Democrats that are co-sponsors of this provision, in the waning days of the session, voted no to consider this on the House floor. I ask the gentleman for another 1 minute.
I will give.
So as I said from the outset, Mr. Speaker, sometimes I don't understand how this process works because these extenders have to pass. We know that. And further, we know that the President will sign this bill with a secure rural schools language in it. We know that. We know that. So, Mr. Speaker, I'm kind of frustrated here, and I think this issue should pass. I think the best way to do that, frankly, is to pass the Senate bill. It is vitally important to extend these tax extenders. Frankly, I think these tax extenders that we have here ought to be made permanent, but maybe we'll have a debate on that at a future time. It's especially important to my state of Washington because it allows for the sales tax deduction of state sales tax from my federal income tax obligation, because Washington State, along with 6 or 7 other states, don't have an income tax, and this is simply a fairness issue. So this is a very important bill very broadly, but it's not a complete bill, and this bill in its current form will not pass the Senate and therefore will not become law. Now, why is that, Mr. Speaker? The reason why is because it leaves out a very, very important provision. A provision that the Senate put in there because I don't always like to congratulate the Senate, but in this case, in their wisdom, to take care of a problem that faces rural America especially, and especially rural America that has a lot of federal lands. And that's the Secure Rural Schools Act. It extends it for 4 years. But what is this act? This act is simply an act to recognize that federal policies in the past, i.e. policies that don't allow some communities to log their federal lands, where there's federal lands, and get the revenue from that, puts a big hurt on local government and school districts. The Secure Rural Schools Act is designed to mitigate that because of federal policy. Now, what I can't understand about this is this has broad bipartisan support. It has had support a number of times, and here we are winding our way down in this Congress, and you would think that the broad bipartisanship of this would recognize that the Senate passed this bill 93-2, and that they would say, you know, I think this has a pretty good chance of becoming law. But no. Earlier this morning, I offered an amendment to the rule to allow me to simply bring up the opportunity to vote up or down on this issue, and it was defeated on a partisan vote. So, Mr. Speaker, this issue is very, very important. And I have in front of me here, Mr. Speaker, and I ask unanimous consent to insert into the record a letter from the National Forest Counties and Schools Coalition.
Without objection.
And the essence of this, Mr. Speaker, is dated today, a letter to Speaker Pelosi to include this provision in the Tax Extenders Act. Well, it is in the Act. It's in the Act that passed the Senate. Now, maybe there's being politics played with this. I know that we're in a political arena here, and sometimes that happens. But I think the Speaker of the House, who comes from urban San Francisco, doesn't understand rural America. And I would suggest that probably the chairman of the Ways and Means Committee, who comes from urban New York City, doesn't understand the needs of rural America. I can only think that's the reason why it's not included in something that has broad bipartisan support. So, Mr. Speaker, I think that we should defeat this rule, and I think that what we need to do at the end of the day is to pass the Senate bill, because we know the President will sign it. He has sent a letter to every member of the House saying that he would sign that bill. I don't like to concede everything to the Senate. There's a lot of times I disagree with what they're saying. But I think we need to take into account what the Majority Leader has said, and I think we need to take into account what the senior senator from Oregon, and by the way, Oregon is one of these states that are heavily impacted by the lack of rural school language in this bill. Senator Wyden said, and I quote after passage of the Senate bill, he said, it's now, and I quote, Mr. Speaker, now it's up to the House and the President to do the right thing, or thousands of critical employees and hundreds of communities across Oregon could face a very difficult winter. Well, I got to tell you, Mr. Speaker, the President is on board. He doesn't have to say the President do the right thing, because the President said he would sign this bill. It's up to the House. And the way to accomplish that, Mr. Speaker, is to defeat this rule so we can take up the Senate bill and concur with them and send it to the President's desk, and it will become law. Far be it from me to defend the actions of the other body. I'm a member of this House, and I'm proud to be a member of this House. But we have to recognize this is a bicameral process. And sometimes we have to recognize, as they have to recognize, on some legislation that we pass where we don't move, and that's happened in the past. This one is a 93-2. That is overwhelming, and it includes language, as I mentioned, on secure rural schools. That is very, very important. So I hope that the Senate bill passes. I would urge my colleagues to defeat this rule, as I mentioned, and the underlying bill so we can take that up, and I appreciate the gentleman's yielding my time.